Good morning, everyone. Great to see you this rainy morning. I'm actually enjoying a little bit of rain. It reminds me of Ohio. Since I just moved here, I'm enjoying it a little more than most of you, I suppose. I'm Ben Ogles, Dean of the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here to our honored alumni lecture today. You can't hear me? I can hear myself. How about the back row? Can you hear me okay, Lori? Excellent. It's my pleasure to welcome you here. As I said, our honored graduate this year is Don H. Staheli, an alumnus from the School of Social Work, and his wife Cindy is here, as well as all of their children, I understand, and some husbands and wives. And are there any grandchildren? Grandchildren? Oh yeah, there's one right down there. So we're glad to have them here joining with us at the college today. Our opening prayer will be given by Janice Nielsen, who's a Master's of Social Work student from Spanish Fork, Utah, after which Gordon Lim, who's the director of our School of Social Work, will introduce Don. Following his remarks, we'll have some time for questions and answers after the Q&A, and I'll help keep us on task there. Then Kelly Stout, a Master's of Social Work student from Provo, will give the benediction. So we'll have the prayer now from Janice.
Our dear Father in heaven, as we come before thee this day, we are so grateful for the many blessings that thou hast given to us. We are so grateful to be able to come together in this venue and listen to Brother Staheli. Wouldst thou please help us to open our minds and to retain the things that he has to say, that we might be able to go forward and share those things with our brothers and sisters. Please help us to be safe, and we are grateful for the wonderful weather that we have right now with all of the rain. And again, we are grateful for all that we have, and say these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. All right, we are very excited in social work. This has been a number of years in the making for us. There was a little 3-year period where we were a little bit limited in nominating Don for this, but very appreciative to be able to honor Don and to hear his message today. Don Staheli was the personal secretary to President Gordon B. Hinckley. He is also the author of the children's best-selling book, The Story of the Walnut Tree. We have a copy of that in our home. He was born in Spanish Fork, Utah, and later served a mission to the Franco-Belgian mission. He is a licensed clinical social worker and has a bachelor's degree in history and master's degrees in international management and social work from BYU. He and his wife Cindy have 5 children and 13, is it still 13? 14 children, grandchildren, sorry. 14 children. And Cindy Staheli is a former member of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. Brother Staheli worked for LDS Family Services for 15 years. He taught seminary and institute for the church education system. He was also, which I just recently found out, a distinguished military graduate and United States Air Force officer. Previously, he served as a regional representative, stake president, and bishop. He and his wife recently returned from serving as president of the France Paris mission. Don Staheli is a private pilot, a banjo musician, a singer, a runner, a licensed ham radio operator, author, and song lyricist. So we've asked him if there is an earthquake, that if he would bring his ham radio, and I think we're going to be in good shape today. Most of you probably don't know, but one of Don's most important contributions to the college was the creation of the Marjorie Pay Hinckley Endowed Chair in Social Work and Social Sciences. This endowment was initiated by Brother Staheli while a member of the Social Work Advisory Council. We have a few other members of that council that served with him on that council here with us as well. Funds from that endowment have supported the annual Marjorie Pay Hinckley Lecture, delivered by a prominent social sciences scholar, visiting professors and scholars to provide workshops, seminars and individual mentoring opportunities for faculty and students, mentored student learning and faculty research grants, scholarly research conferences, and outreach efforts, including community training, internships, and conferences and services. So you can see this endowment has and continues to be a major portion of funding for faculty and students. We in the college are indebted to Brother Staheli for his efforts in church, community, and as alumnus of the college. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you this year's honored alumni lecturer, Don Staheli.
This isn't the most comfortable place to stand for a number of reasons, partly because there's a whole array of computer stuff here, but it's a little hard to be close to the mic. But at any rate, good. Then those who want to sleep can do so comfortably. It is a pleasure to be here, a great pleasure. I've spent much, much more time on that side of this kind of setting than I ever thought I would on this side, and than I ever have on this side. And I can't help but take just a moment to acknowledge some of those that are here. I have 3 degrees. I call them 3 degrees of no glory whatsoever. But nonetheless, the most important of all was my Master of Social Work degree. That's where I really became educated. I learned a lot before in the 2 previous degrees, but the MSW was where I really, from my perspective, was educated. And I honor those who are here, particularly Barbara Wheeler, who probably Ken Matheson, 2 of the greatest professors one could ever hope for. And Elaine Walton, though she's much younger than I, was in the same class as I was for our MSW. And there are others, Dr. Seipel, Mike Seipel, wonderful teacher. So do not hesitate if you have the opportunity, Shirley Cox, if you have the opportunity to take courses in the School of Social Work, you will not ever regret it in the least. I acknowledge also, of course, my family. They're, well, the most important thing. My mother, who has provided a legacy of faith and service and has been what all mothers should be, and my children, who are perfect, really, from my perspective, and my wife, who really is perfect from everybody's perspective. I was leaving the office one day. President Hinckley was walking out, and he stopped in the hallway. I was behind him. I hadn't said anything. He stopped in the hallway, and I, of course, stopped behind him, and he turned around, unbidden at all, and said, "Don, any good you've ever done is because of your wife." I agreed, of course, and off we went. I don't know what prompted that. He probably took a look at me and said, "Has he ever done any good?" Well, he must have done something because of her. But she is remarkable, and I appreciate her to no end. I've been really looking forward in many ways. Oh, by the way, I must acknowledge also all of the France-Paris missionaries who are here with whom we served. You ought to stand up so people can see how many there are. Cindy, you should stand up too. Look at these great... These are some of the finest young people that could possibly be, and we love them very, very much. I'm anxious to find out what this is going to be about today. We were asked probably in May or so what the title of this lecture would be. And I have, of course, had no idea what it should be. So I just said, it's the principle of the thing, thinking we could make something out of that. And it's been very interesting to learn myself as I have thought about this whole issue. A number of years ago, I wrote a little book by this title with the idea in mind that when memory fades and you really can't recall exactly what went on in any particular individual event, that the principle of the thing could endure in your mind if you learned it and paid attention to it. And these principles, which might be called, I suppose, the lessons of life, can guide us in the development of wisdom and good judgment. There's not a soul in this room that doesn't hope for wisdom and hope to have good judgment. And I believe, as I've learned in preparing this lecture, that perhaps if you listen very closely to the whisperings of the Spirit in your heart, that you'll be able to learn something that will guide you in the development of wisdom and good judgment, those valuable commodities which can't even buy with a MasterCard. So important. The sources of understanding and learning of principles. I want to talk about three. Of course, you have to include the scriptures. I won't talk too much about that source of learning, but I did note some wonderful scriptures that speak of this learning of principles. In the 130th section, whatever principle of intelligence we attain unto in this life, it will rise with us in the resurrection. 138th section, through his atonement and by obedience to the principles of the gospel, mankind might be saved. 105th section, and Zion cannot be built up unless it is by the principles of the law of the celestial kingdom. And in the 88th section, of course, teach ye diligently, and we learn in the truth in principle and in doctrine. So understanding the principles. In other words, if you don't understand the principles, no matter what has happened, you didn't get it. I work now with the Quorum of the 12. After coming back from our mission, I had the incredible good fortune to be assigned to be the secretary to the Quorum of the 12. And that has been, we've only been there for about 3 months, but it's been one of the greatest learning experiences that I could imagine. And I didn't know why entirely that was happening until I had a conversation with Elder Oakes one day. And he was talking about President Packer, with whom we mostly work. And he said, President Packer is principle-oriented. And Elder Oakes said, and I resonate to that. And so I began to understand that what I needed to be learning here were the principles that were being discussed, because it's really fun to sit in the meetings and just listen to the stories. And with President Monson, the exact same thing, constantly telling stories. You might hear the same story 3 times in one conversation, which means he thinks you didn't get it. And so he's going to repeat it. Or it means he just forgot that he told it. I don't know which. But nonetheless, these brethren often speak, I wouldn't say in parables, but they tell of their experiences in the hope that we will understand the principle that they're trying to teach, not just be entertained. The other day I went into President Packer's office, and he told me something, and I said, oh yes, and this, and this, and then this. And when I walked out, he said he hadn't gotten 2 words out, except I had these other things to tell him. And as we ended that very brief little discussion or conversation, he said, well, thanks for listening. You're welcome. Next time I will try harder to listen and to understand the principle that you're trying to teach me, because he wasn't inviting me in to listen to me. He was trying to teach. And so as we listen, as we read the scriptures, and as we listen to the brethren, let's listen truly and try and discover the principle that they're trying to teach us. Joseph Smith, of course, said, and you all know this, I teach them correct principles, and they govern themselves. President Packer, some years ago, made a statement. He said, the true essence of priesthood administration is not in procedure. Priesthood administration, the essence thereof, does not lie in procedure. It is in knowing and teaching principles and doctrine. So understanding the principles. There's not a bishop in the church who didn't go from the meeting when he was sustained into the office with his counselors and say, now what do we do? Because it's just such an overwhelming thing. And all they can do is rely on the principles that they've learned that have prepared them. And this would be true of really any priesthood calling, any auxiliary calling, fatherhood, motherhood, marriage, even studenthood. Now what do? We'll fall back on the principles that you've learned that got you where you are, and strive to learn a little wisdom, strive to exercise a little good judgment, and you'll be all right. Let me just share with you now some information, stories perhaps also, that will help teach the principle that I'm trying to get across to you. Clear back in 1972, President Packer gave a talk and then wrote a little booklet called Why Stay Morally Clean. In that, he made this statement. This power of creation, he said, must be strong, for most men seek adventure by nature. Most men by nature seek adventure. Except for the compelling persuasion of these feelings, this powerful feeling of wanting to be a father, a parent, a husband, men would be reluctant to accept the responsibility of sustaining a home and a family. He said this power must be constant, too, for it becomes a binding tie in family life. What he was saying there, which to some would have sounded ridiculous, is that men are hardwired for home life. That would sound offensive to some. But fascinatingly, there was very recently, just last month, a study, the results of a study were released. This study indicated that, I'm quoting from the Wall Street Journal, men are biologically wired to care for their children, a new study suggests. The study followed a large number of men in their 20s and found testosterone levels fell after they found partners and became fathers. Lower testosterone levels could help men who are fathers better handle the demands of parenting and allow them to become more nurturing, the research suggests. Why? Because they have biologically lost some of that sense of adventure. Now, some of us suffer from the Peter Pan syndrome and still want to climb that rock. But I can tell you that for the most part, we are biologically hardwired for home life. President Packer taught the principle. Now the studies are confirming it. In 1998, President Hinckley, speaking in the priesthood meeting of that October conference, he was hesitant to do so. I remember very well when he was preparing this talk, and he was hesitant to say much because he didn't want to frighten people. But with courage, he went ahead and spoke of the dream of Pharaoh as recorded in the 41st chapter of Genesis, the interpretation of which by Joseph indicated 7 years of famine, or 7 good years and 7 years of famine. You remember that, of course. And then President Hinckley said, "Now, brethren, I am not predicting years of famine in the future, but I am suggesting that the time has come to get our houses in order. So many of our people are living on the very edge of their incomes. In fact, some are living on borrowings. The economy," he said in 1998, "is a fragile thing. There is portent of stormy weather ahead." He wasn't prophesying, but he was being a prophet. There is a portent of stormy weather ahead to which we had better give heed." And then he went on in the talk particularly to speak about mortgages and the importance of having a reasonable mortgage. The principle that he was trying to teach: have a house of order. Exercise wisdom. Have a house of order. And then we know what happened 10 years after that talk was given, in 2008 and thereabouts, a dramatic downturn in the economies of the world, which has not yet played itself out. We have no idea where it's going, but it doesn't look particularly good. And President Hinckley warned every single one of us as he taught the principle very specifically about the importance of being wise, seeing the economy as a fragile thing, easily taken apart and difficult to put back together, and having a house of order. Well, we have to listen for the principles. I learned something very early on, and that was that I needed to, if I wanted to be all right, I needed to listen to my wife. When we were first married, I felt like I needed to know everything. I needed to have all the answers. I was, after all, the patriarch. But then I learned quickly that if I just listened to Cindy, we would be all right. And then if we weren't, it would be her fault. I noticed this little cartoon the other day, The Crossroads of Wisdom. You can go left to past mistakes, you can go right to future gambles, or if you want to go straight ahead, listen to your wife. And I firmly believe that, and have done so ever since. So, if we want to learn the principles of life, if we want to understand those things that will allow us to achieve wisdom and have good judgment, then I think Lisa Willie is the one who wrote that. Maybe not, I don't know. She's in the School of Social Work. But at any rate, if you want to be square with life, then oftentimes all you need to do is listen to someone else who has wisdom beyond your own, perhaps has been where you're hoping to go, and probably you'll be okay. And I'd like to share a few things with you wherein I learned from others some of the most important lessons of my life. First of all, let me tell you about Leslie of Liverpool. President Hinckley had gone to dedicate the Preston, England Temple, and that's always an exciting and wonderful experience. And the members are so careful and trying so hard to make everything go well. And as we came back into the accommodations, the place where the president was staying, it was the temple president's home in the MTC complex there at Preston. And so it's a secure building, and there were security people all over. And there was a little man sitting in a chair in the hallway, and he was to secure the hallway. And I just kind of shook my head in a cynical way, really, I'm embarrassed to say, as I walked up to him because I thought, this is just really overkill. Why does he need to be here? The poor man. And I introduced myself, and I asked him what his name was, and he said, Leslie. And I said, well, Leslie, where are you from? He said, Liverpool. And I said, oh, Leslie of Liverpool. And I was probably mocking him a little bit. I'm just so embarrassed and ashamed to say, but in a way it was good because it was setting me up to learn something. I said, Leslie, do you really need to be here in this hallway? And he said, yes, I'm assigned to the security effort here. And I said, well, there's nothing to guard against. Nobody could get in here if they tried. And if they really got in here, you couldn't stop them anyway. So he said, it's okay, I'll just stay here. And I said, Leslie, well, can I get you a more comfortable chair? And he got a little firm with me. He said, no. And in his Liverpudlian accent, which I can't mimic, he said, no, I'll just do me duty. And I said, well, Leslie, can't I at least get you something to drink or to eat? And he said, no, I'll just do me duty. And so I said, okay. And I went into my room and thought that was the end of that. Well, in the middle of the night, I had the most vivid dream. Now, we were in England, and so it was understandable. It was a dream of knights and shining armor and chargers, horses, and battles with swords and lances, etc. It was very exciting. And there was one particular knight who stood out above all the rest on a white steed, and I don't remember if his armor was shining or not, but he definitely was the most prolific of the knights. And as the contests ended, the battle ended, whatever, he rode up to where I was standing or viewing this scene and got off his white horse and came over, took off his helmet and said, I am Leslie of Liverpool. And I woke up wide awake, which is very unusual for me in the middle of the night. And the Spirit spoke to me and said, I'll just do me duty. What you saw there was a hero doing his duty, and I learned the principle that has been so important to me since. Now, the next night we came back, and I looked for Leslie, hoping he would be there, and he probably didn't have any idea why, but I asked somebody to take a picture. I wish I had it to show you, but I asked someone to take a picture of us so that I could prove that I knew a hero. And I had met one. I'll just do me duty. A great principle. that can guide our lives. Excuse me for being emotional. Well, if I'm emotional over that one, the next one will really get us. I met a young lady once named Millie. That isn't a real name, but she had been abused by her stepfather for a number of years and was in the process in her early adulthood of trying to resolve the issues that surrounded that abuse. Issues of fear, relationship difficulties, of course, serious issues of self-esteem and where she fit into things, and trying to overcome the sense that all of the abuse that took place was her fault, which of course she had been told it was. Well, as we were striving to deal with that, the first thing that she was able to understand is that she was a victim, that none of this was her fault. But that didn't really heal the pain. She could label herself a victim and say, okay, I can understand in my adult intellect that I was, as a little girl, was not responsible for this, but that doesn't take away the pain. Not really. And so we began to explore more and more how she could overcome this sense of being damaged goods. And one day we came across a quote from Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. And the quote is this. I'll read it a little bit slowly because I don't have it on a slide. The quote is, "The soul helps the body, and at certain moments uplifts it. It is the only bird that sustains its cage." All of a sudden, the lights came on for Millie. And she said to herself, he didn't really touch me. He beat up on the cage. He abused the cage. He knocked the cage around. He damaged the cage a little, but he never got to the bird. And she began to understand her dual nature. And she said, you know, even with all of that, even with all that took place, the bird inside of me, the real me, can still sing. And Millie was liberated. And Millie understood the principle, we both did, that bad things may happen to me, but they are not me. And Millie then was able to launch herself, understanding that basic principle. She was able to make sense of everything that had happened to her, to some degree at least, all the feelings that she had had, and she was liberated and able then to go about not trying to deal with the abuse and the events, not the what that took place, but she was able to deal with the why. And she was able to understand who she was, who she is. Because bad things may happen to me, but they're not me. She learned that great, great principle. So, and she taught me that principle. So we learn from the brethren, we learn from the scriptures, we learn from other people, and these great principles come to life. But we could also learn just from our own experience, of course, just learn from ourselves. Neil A. Maxwell said, some of the most important preaching you will ever hear, I'm going to repeat that, some of the most important preaching you will ever hear will be from the pulpit of your memory, if you'll pay attention to the things that happen and learn the principles that are there for you to learn. I learned another one day, very interesting. I like to jog. I love to jog. I'm not a runner per se, but I love to be out and to be jogging along. And especially it's fun in the weather. This would be a perfect day. It was yesterday too in Salt Lake. And in the early morning when it's dark. And at one point, it was at an LDS Family Services seminar in a canyon up above Ogden, and went out early one morning to jog along the country road. Pitch black, no lights, just me and my thoughts. And it was a very, very pleasant experience until I began to hear in the far distance, and I'm getting farther and farther away from where we were staying, our lodging, and I began to hear in the far distance dogs barking, kind of angrily. And I thought, well, they're farm dogs, they're over somewhere, and I won't go near the farm. But they began to get louder. and louder. And pretty soon I could tell those dogs were coming my direction, and it wasn't just one or two. I don't know how many for sure, but well, it looked like a big pack, but there were probably at least 6. And farm dogs are not always gentle, especially if they're defending the farm. But here they came, and they were, pretty soon I could tell they were coming toward me right on the same road. Well, then I could see them in the dark in the distance, and I literally started going in circles because I didn't know where to go. There was no place to go. I was about to be attacked by a pack of angry dogs. And I even thought there was a fence post that round, and I thought, well, maybe I can perch on that. But I knew it wouldn't do any good. And I just didn't know what to do, and I've got to admit, panic began to raise up from the deepest recesses of my being. And I just had no idea, but as they got probably closer, as close as that piano, which is, 30 feet, all of a sudden, from deep down inside, came a growl. And I turned to the dogs and said, "Go home!" They stopped. But they didn't go away, so I yelled it again. "Go home!" They turned, literally tails between legs, and went home. Whew. I was so grateful. And I didn't think, I then left too immediately, going the opposite direction, and didn't think about what principle I might have learned until a little later. But this made sense to me as I began to think about that experience. As we stand firm against the evils of life, they will vanish. They will go away, along with the fear that they cause. A tremendous principle to learn, especially in this day. Because in this day, if you stand firm against what we know to be evil, you will be criticized, called intolerant, bigoted, narrow-minded, and probably a Mormon. So we have to have the courage to stand firm for the things that we know to be right against the evils of life. And they will ultimately vanish, along with the fear that we might feel when we're confronted by those evils. And that can be applied, this great principle can be applied in so many facets of life. I doubt that many of you are going to meet a pack of farm dogs on a dark country road and have to yell at them, "Go home." But you will meet others who will be just as threatening and probably more dangerous, because they'll be spiritually dangerous. And at that point, this principle can serve you well. Well, let me just mention that in the 2nd chapter of 2nd Nephi is a wonderful verse which indicates that Satan has no power but that which we give to him. There are only 2 voices to which we need pay any attention. Ultimately, there are only 2 voices that speak to us. One is the voice of the Spirit, and the other is the voice of the natural man. And Satan has no power until we begin to listen to the voice of the natural man. But if we tell him to leave, that we're not going to heed, neither his voice nor the voice of our own natural man, when we cease to yield to that or to listen to that, then he will vanish, as we well know. And then our fear will cease. Excuse me, I have some water here. And in the 48th chapter of Alma, it indicates that Moroni did not listen to the voice of Satan, and that if all men were such as he, then Satan would never have any power, and we would all be able to overcome the evils of life. And it isn't just Moroni. You may think, well, I couldn't be like him. But the next verse in that 48th chapter says, "But Ammon and Aaron and the sons of Mosiah and Alma himself were just as good." And we know where they came from. We know that they did not stand firm against the evils of life until they ultimately were taught this principle, and then they became just as good as Moroni ever had been. a vital thing for us all to learn. Well, another principle. When I was a young man living in New Jersey, a boy, about 12, there was not far from our home a wonderful grove of newly planted trees. I mean, they were probably 10 years old. And so the pines were just medium-sized, just larger than saplings. And what we used to do is climb to the top of one of those pines, get as high as we possibly could, and then grasp on to the highest point, and then lean over, and they were so supple and so young that they would then bend down, and we could ride them down until we got to the point where we were not too far off the ground, and then let go, and we would drop, up would spring the sapling, the pine, and we would have had an adventure. Sometimes they were a little larger, so two of us would have to climb the tree. Well, that was a great and thrilling thing to do for a 12-year-old boy, as you can well imagine. But we had one big boy and a smaller boy that had to always go together because the smaller boy could never make the tree tip. Well, they went up at one point, the big boy climbing as high as he could and the smaller boy coming after them. Pretty soon over went the tree, but they somehow missed their timing, and the big boy let go first. And the little boy then, as if he were on a catapult, went sky high, and when the tree snapped, he lost his grip, and down he came, 2 broken arms. So 2 broken arms and a stern parental lecture later, we found that that game was no longer to be played. And I've thought about that and laughed about it, groaned about it many times, till I began to really think about it and to understand the principle that one needed to learn from that experience. Never climb higher than you're willing to fall. This harkens back to that adventure thing. We saw on the news the other night, or on 60 Minutes I think it was, about a young man who does free soloing. And oh my, when he gets married, his testosterone levels are going to drop through the floor because they're so high now that he has absolutely no fear climbing Half Dome, something like 3,000 feet of sheer granite face with no ropes. Well, he is climbing much higher than he would certainly be willing to fall. But it doesn't just apply to granite faces, it applies to credit cards. It applies to mortgages. It applies to friends we make. It applies to many, many, many different aspects of life. Never get out on a limb farther than you're willing to fall should it break. Had we only learned that, some of us, in various circumstances that have proven to be difficult, we might have avoided them. Well, another interesting and fun principle to know and to think about, and which can ultimately allow us to gain wisdom. Now, I've thought about what wisdom is. The ability to understand the why and not just the what. And it comes with experience. When people go to the top of the mountain and ask the guru a question, generally speaking, the real basic question they're asking is not what, it's why. They want to know why. It might be, what can I do to have a happy life? But it's more or less, why am I here on earth? The guru, the one with the experience, the one who understands the principles, is the one who can answer the why questions, not just the what questions. And with that, then, comes wisdom. And in addition to wisdom, is good judgment. The ability to make choices which maximize the possibility of the most positive outcome. When I first came to work at church headquarters and was introduced to President Monson, he said to me, "Do you have good judgment?" I said, "Yes, sir." I knew all the right answers, even if they weren't true. But he said, "Well, you can't teach good judgment. You can't teach good judgment." And I've thought about that a lot, and I think he was absolutely correct. You cannot teach good judgment, but you can learn it. If we learn the principles that life teaches us, if we will focus on the principles that guide human behavior, then we can apply those and exercise good judgment, because we will have some sense of what the possible outcomes would be, and we can make the choices which will maximize the possibility for the most positive outcome. I spoke to a friend about this, and he said, I think I can visualize that, and he made this little graphic. He said, as you base your life on principles, then you will gain experience, you'll understand why things happen, and you'll have wisdom. And that wisdom will, as I say, help you understand the whys, which will allow you to develop good judgment. You can learn, even if it can't be taught necessarily, you can learn good judgment. And then you'll know how to behave. You'll know the hows, which will give you the best experiences, which will increase your wisdom, and you'll understand better the whys, exercise greater judgment, understand the hows of behavior, how I should behave, and how I should order my life, and then wisdom will grow. Well, I think that makes sense, and I'm anxious to continue to do my best, at least, to apply that in my life. Now, let me just, I know this is a lecture and not a devotional per se, but I can't, I want to end now so we have some time for questions, should there be any, and if not, that's perfectly okay. You'll just get a jump on lunchtime. I can't miss the opportunity to tell you, as one who has been really more than you can imagine, because I couldn't imagine, in the very, very inner workings of the church. In every setting, at every level, in the most sacred of settings, in the most personal of settings, just about no place I have not seen in terms of the hierarchy of the church. And I can tell you, without any equivocation whatsoever, that the closer you get, the better they look and are. We are led as a church, and that includes this university, by prophets of God. Literally, prophets, seers, and revelators. They understand the principles. They've learned them sometimes through the most difficult experiences that life has to offer, but they get it. Don't ever think that these old men don't get it. Now, Elder Bednar is the only one who would probably say in a meeting, gee, I love my iPad and I've got some real cool apps. He's probably the only one who would say that. But you might be surprised to know that all but 2 of the 12 have iPads. And I know they all have iPhones. They really go for it, and they love the technology, and we're going to see things that are just really fun coming out on these. But they do get it. They understand. They understand the youngest of the young. They understand the oldest of the old, which most of them are. But they have wisdom. And they are just so anxious to lead and guide and direct this church. In other words, the people, in the most appropriate way. Occasionally I've heard him say, this would be a great church if there weren't any people in it. And that's sometimes true. But they are dedicated whole heart and soul to the direction of this great people, the Latter-day Saints. And they understand the principles, and they want us to understand them ourselves. They want us to learn the correct principles and to govern ourselves and to be Latter-day Saints. They long for that, they hope for it, they pray for it, and very often we let them down. And so I'm hopeful and prayerful that we will learn the principles of truth, the principles that govern a holy life, and we will apply those generously in our own lives, in wisdom and in good judgment, and that we might then fulfill the measure of our creation. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
Well now, any questions? We could turn up the lights. And this can go off even. Doesn't, well, or leave it, I don't care. But if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them, whatever they might be, with regard to my work. 15 years with LDS Family Services. I loved every minute of that. If you have social work questions, there are those that can answer those better. If you have questions that are hard, Sister Staheli, Cindy is here. And anything easy, I'll take. Any question at all, any thought that you'd like to share, any insight that might improve upon what we've been saying. Yes, please.
Give us just a little synopsis of the state of the Paris mission where I once served. How are things in the temple that was announced there? I know it was announced a couple of years ago, perhaps prematurely, and it had some difficulty getting authorization.
Sure. Well, in 1998, President Hinckley spoke near Paris and said it's time for France to have a temple. So that's kind of seen as the initial announcement. But there was no effort had been made really to find property or anything like that. They began to look, and it's very, very difficult to find the property and very, very difficult to get the political approvals. So there were a number of sites that were considered, and one got pretty close, and so it was talked about a lot. A lot of people knew about it just outside of Versailles. So that was almost seen as an announcement. When President Hinckley saw it, he said it's not the right place. That was a great disappointment to a lot of people because it's such a beautiful site. But it wasn't the right site. So then they began to work kind of behind the scenes and found a piece of property in Le Chesnay, which is adjacent to Versailles, the city of Versailles, 5-minute drive from the chateau. But then the political process began to unfold. The mayor was very willing. And about a year and a half or two ago, he actually took to the city council the proposal that the temple be built. And there was no objection, no serious objection. Then they had to wait for him to be reelected, because if the new mayor was anti, then it would have to start over. But he was reelected, and so then things began in earnest, and but still very quietly. But when he finally gave his approval and his willingness, indicated his willingness to issue the building permit, then there was about a 90-day appeal period. So the city announced that the temple was going to be built, therefore the church had to announce it. But there's a 90-day, I believe, appeal period, and the official announcement, really ultimate announcement, could not be made until that appeal process is over. So sometime this month, someone could appeal the ruling, and it might be prolonged. But at any rate, that's where we are. And the state of the mission is fantastic. It's that we have a French mission president there now, the first time a Frenchman has presided over the Paris mission, and he's just terrific, picking up all the pieces that we dropped. Any other question? Was that the bell to quit? Oh, darn. Thank you. Haven't been nervous about this in the least because I knew I'd just be with friends. Thank you.